just like our paycheck isn't just ours, right? So like we have children, we're caregivers, we're helping, we're the rich auntie. So I would definitely say the biggest ones are mental health and being able to afford it. And also like getting people to realize that to you, the 63 cent might seem like it's just going to me, but it's helping pay for my little sister's medication, or my best friend's son needs to play basketball and she needs an extra support. So I would say those are the areas that I think it affects the most.
Hey, I'm Teen Zekas, your pivot and pay strategist. I help Black women double their income by leveraging their existing skills. I am all about getting Black women paid, whether you're an employee or a business owner. And you're listening to the Getting Black Women Paid podcast. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Getting Black Women Paid podcast. I'm your host, Teen Zekas, international speaker, award-winning author, founder and CEO of Getting Black Women Paid, and your Audacity coach. Today, we have a guest episode, and our guest is doing incredible work in the space for pay equity for Black women. I cannot wait to dig into it, so let's get right to the introductions. Tishayla Williams is an IO psychologist, writer, and the founder of the TW Collective, a consulting firm helping organizations transform diversity awareness into measurable pay equity and accountability. Her work centers on advancing equity, strategy, and organizational culture, with a focus on closing the pay gap for Black women. She has spoken at the Benjamin A. Quarles Conference and the International Conference on the Future of Women, sharing insights on the economic realities of Black women's labor and leadership. Tashayla's mission is simple: to make equity not just a value, but a verified outcome. Let's get right into the conversation. Well, Tashayla, thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited for this conversation.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I'm a little bit nervous, so if I snort, I apologize.
No worries. The listeners have been forewarned. We're good. Well, I love the work you do, and so I'm really thrilled for this first question. I always like to start with your origin story. How did you come to be doing the work that you do?
So it's actually pretty crazy. So I started off, I'll say, with the army. I think I worked as a legal clerk in the army, so I was often like the only Black woman. I worked with a lot of the officers, and often a lot of them were like white males. We're like most of the army, but anyway, sorry, but that was like my first experience in like a job where like my voice wasn't recognized, and like some of the suggestions that I was giving, like sometimes I would have to like I'd be like, "Nope, that's not the legal memorandum, or that's not the paperwork," and they wouldn't listen. And so one thing I told myself at the beginning of my career is I was like, by the end of my career, I don't wanna have to sit in a room full of white men and like, you know, tone myself down or mute myself. Um, but the real pay equity work, came out of literally I graduated with my master's in, workplace psychology and HR in 2023. And it was time for my student loans to be due, and I couldn't find a job that was paying. I loved the work that I was doing, but my salary was only like 51,000, and when you owe 51,000 in student loan debt, it's kind of hard to figure it out. But the real, like, I would say, kick in the tail was I bought my first leadership role, and it was considered a, what is it, like, when they don't give you a pay raise? So they just, like, kind of, like, give you the title, but not the,
Right, more work and responsibility, but no extra
yeah.
pay. Yep.
So I was working on the corporate team. I went for, like, a leadership they had, like, a leadership conference at where the company was based, and I found out that everybody on the team was making 20K more than I was. And when I brought it up to my supervisor, which I will say both her So my supervisor was like the vice president of compliance, and then the head was obviously the president of compliance. Both of them had they were their daughters were half black, so they were both married to black men. So coming to them, I was like, oh, they'll understand because we've had like conversations because me and their daughters are the same age, and basically it turned into um they tried to demote me, and then part of the demotion after that happened turned into them taking my master's degree off of, like, my job description, and so that was kind of like, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to work here anymore, and I'm not gonna be able to, like no, so that's okay. So that's kind of how the pay inequity came about. Crazy.
Ooh, um, thank you for sharing that story because unfortunately it is so relatable. I know that so many of our listeners have dealt with one, the fake promotion that doesn't come with more pay, have dealt with, I'm going to talk to this person I think should be an ally, and then instead I'm going to be punished for it. So many of us have dealt with, I've got the degrees and no one's going to pay me for them. So I appreciate you, one, sharing that story, but two, taking that next step to then dig into this work and try to make a change in that. So I wanna honor your story and thank you for making that pivot so that the rest of us can too.
No, I appreciate it. I think I don't know if it's like millennial learning, but like millennials, they taught us to be like well-rounded and solution oriented. So I was like, well, I have to figure out a way to solve this problem. So
Absolutely. And, in your work, you've said that Black women's pay inequity isn't just a data point, but it's a lived reality, right? And your story illustrates that, and so many of our stories illustrate that. But I'm wondering if you can unpack what that looks like on the ground and what you see as the most overlooked cost of underpaying Black women.
I would say for me, I think in like even in my own I think the big thing is like mental health. Because like mental health, unfortunately, in our society is considered a luxury. And I've been there where it's like I don't make enough to pay my therapist and I'm like in between jobs, so I don't have healthcare insurance. So I'm like, I remember having to pay I was like, I pay her, I was like, let me scrape by this like $50. Um, so I can pay to go to therapy because I saw it as, like, a regular necessity. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen. And to be honest, I think it goes through, like, multiple layers too because a lot of Black women, um, we're not just like, our paycheck isn't just ours, right? So, like, we have children, we're caregivers, we're helping we're the rich auntie. So I would definitely say the biggest ones are mental health and being able to afford it. And also like getting people to realize that to you, the 63 cent might seem like it's just going to me, but it's helping pay for my little sister's medication or my best friend's son needs to play basketball and she needs an extra support. So I would say those are the areas that I think it affects the most.
Absolutely. And when you say the 63 cents, just for anyone who's not aware of the statistics, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, statistically, so usually there it varies between sources, but for the most part, it's usually like 63 cents to 69 cents, but it kind of averages out. So, Black women on average make about 63 cents to the white man's dollar, and I think white women make 72 cents, I believe, and then I think, women who of Asian, of descent, I think they're at like 82 cents. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everyone's following. So when we say that 63 cents, on top of the fact that we are paid less, a lot of that money is going towards other things that maybe white men don't necessarily have to spend money on, but we are the caregivers, we are the pillars of our community, etc. And and I definitely want to dig into how bias plays into this stuff, right? You've talked about how bias hides in performance reviews, promotion decisions, and for any of the Black women listening who really feel stuck, no matter how hard she performs, you know, what's actually happening behind the scenes?
So I think that so there's like a multitude of things. Particularly, I think one of them is there's like so many different biases. There's like the age bias. So if you get to a certain point in your career, they don't want to promote you because they're like, oh, you're closer to retirement. There's the bias of like if you're a woman of childbearing age-bearing years, they don't wanna promote you because they're like, "Oh, well, there's a thinking in corporate America that once you have children, your ambition goes away." But I think the particular bias with Black women is that just I think there's just so many things. I think it's racism, but I think also them just feeling like even though they know that we can do it, to them, they can't quantify the amount of work that we put into it. And that goes into mentoring. If you're the only Black person on your team, or even just the only woman on your team, that turns you become an instant like DEI. They want you on all these posters at work. And so it's you emotional tax of, having to be, mentoring DEI and also just knowing that you're not getting paid enough, and like I did, and you just find out through casual conversations with people that like, "Hey, we're doing the same amount of work, but why is this person so and so?" So yeah, I think that there's so many different facets to it, but I think it's just people not valuing Black women and what we bring to the table, educationally, entrepreneurially, just in so many different facets, I think are the main thing.
Absolutely, and I had to laugh because I have definitely been overrepresented on the website of my company. Oh my goodness, look at our one Black woman engineer. It was on every page. Oh, and and one thing I'm really curious about, one of the things that, we wish more executives understood in terms of the economic realities of Black women's labor is the opportunity that they're missing when they don't pay us what we deserve. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think as a demographic, I think Black women, we've always had been given the least, but somehow we've been able to make, like a diamond what do they say? Like diamonds out of, rocks or whatever. There's like an analogy for it. And I think it's ultimately like in our thing, and where we are now with innovation. I think like with the 350,000 women who at the beginning of the year, like, who lost their jobs or stepped away, a lot of them are like, we're, we're able to pivot. Like I was listening the other day, they created there was a college student at Harvard, he created a braiding robot, and that's, like, the biggest innovation. She's a Black female student at Harvard, and she created a robot. I think it's the thing of, like, we've always been able to especially we were able to see patterns of like, "Oh, well, this isn't working," or I just think we're a light year ahead, unfortunately, and because we're so discriminated against, we're able to see where things are not working and pivot because unfortunately, that's the thing that we've been given. And I think that opportunity of innovation, of even, for instance, like, when I was working in my compliance role, I would like, we had our big one of our biggest demographics were, Spanish-speaking families because I did compliance for a foster care agency, and I was like, "Well, has nobody ever thought to, like, figure out, like, how do we" like, that's a disconnect to me. It shouldn't fall under DEI, unfortunately, but I'm like, it shouldn't take me to be the one to figure out, like, "Hey, where that's a whole gap that the children are not getting the services that they need, their parents are not getting the services that they need. So bringing that up at at a corporate level, I'm just like, nobody thought about that. When we look at this big pie chart of demographics of, children we're aiding. So I think that's where it comes from. We're just able to pick up on things a lot faster. But I
Yeah.
think that people are not they always like, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," or, just they're not willing to get on board, but usually we see the forest through the trees, faster than most people.
Yeah, it took a Black woman to come in and say, "Can we actually speak to the people we s" These wild ideas. You know, one of the things that stood out to me when I first read your bio was that you talk about accountability, and that's the piece that really stuck out to me, and I'm wondering, how can organizations move from that performative DEI statements to systems that actually measure pay equity and close that gap?
I think there's actually, like, buying into it. Like, if you just in general, most businesses, and I forget the statistic off my head at the top of my head, but businesses usually thrive better, particularly after everything that's happened with, like, COVID-19. Businesses who actually are take DEI seriously and take, they embrace different cultures and different ideas in their workplace, they usually thrive. And we can see that with a multitude of places that have not been doing financially well this year who, like, defunded their DEI program. So I think I think they don't see I think often when you're in these boardrooms, you're looking at, like, this quarter through the end of the year, but a lot of people are not seeing, like, where are the sales coming from, like, down the line, right? And I think them actually buying into it, and I think now that there's enough data to prove that DEI actually works, and bringing in it in representation counts, right? So if I know, because like Black women, we're the biggest spenders in most areas of the economy. Like our dollars go back into so many different industries. And I think when you take that and you're like, oh, okay, well, how can we bring those dollars back into our grocery stores? And things like that. When you break it down by the numbers and really think like, oh, and I think now as a culture, we're more cognizant of where our money is going. And so that's something that different industries need to take into account. So I think and it's and the real buy-in, you become so much more of an innovator in your field and you get more support when you're supporting veterans and when you're supporting LGBT community, when you're supporting people of color. So I think that's the thing, the actual buy-in and looking at the data and being like, oh, this actually does make sense, and not just looking at it from, well, what is our gross return for 2025? So that's true. And also I think having incentives, right? I think if you're really, that should be like, to me, like if you're getting a bonus and you're in the C-suite, I think that we should force companies to, if you're getting a bonus at the end of the year, part of that should be how much did you buy into DEI? And that can be numbered in how did you support, like, I know different there's just so many different facets of it, but I think that's pivotal too to where we are, as a society, and particularly as a country, to get people to, buy in, and ultimately, it goes back down to the dollar amount. So if we say, "Hey, Tim or whoever will give you a bonus if you support this amount of this support group or you bring daycare into the workplace." Like, will you think, of course, they're like, oh, well, if this helps with my bonus, of course I'm gonna, build an on-site daycare. So
Yeah. Yeah, and when you talk about accountability, it makes so much sense to be talking about incentives, right? That it's, you know, we are going to reward this type of work because it's what we value. That's such a great point. And so let's say, a lot of leaders say they care about equity. Let's say they do and they've bought in, but their systems are still failing us. What questions should employees and even consultants like you, what should we be asking to test whether a company's commitment is real or just performative?
I would say the first thing is like, what is DEI or what does equity look like for you as a company? Because I think your core values and your ethos, right? Like if you're a company that values women leadership, okay, so if you've had this X amount of women removed from your workforce and your over the last few years, obviously there's a disconnect there. So trying to figure out, okay, well, why is it that we're saying that we support women in the workplace and mothers in the workplace, but yet we're not, no moms are coming to our job interviews. Um, I think that, and also um, I think pressure, I think and I say that lightly because especially where we are in the time and place, sometimes being the spearheaded one I've been there to be like, "Oh, well, we should talk more about pay inequity." You kind of put a target on your back, but I think if you're really passionate about the work, making sitting down and like reading your bylaws, reading their like what does DEI look like to you and how are you like give me some tangible results on how this is coming back to your employees. And I don't want a pizza party. Um, like so that's a big thing, like corporate pizza parties, like if you support it can be anything. Like if you support we want to get the best new innovative mind to work at our tech firm. Okay, well, are you helping with student loan debt? Are you doing an initiative to help reduce that loan relief? Things like that. I think and not being afraid to ask the questions, and it doesn't matter what level you're at. My doctoral research is focused on, like, mid-level management, but even if you're, when I worked at the, foster care agency, I would pressure the caseworkers to don't be afraid. If you get the opportunity to talk to the CEO, tell them, "Why do we not have a translator if this family is speaking Spanish?" So yeah, and be afraid don't be afraid to dig in there and ask the questions and 2 and sit down with them and be like, "Okay, well, we're out of this because unfortunately everything that happened in January of 2024 with the defunding of DEI, but what does DEI look like for the next 5 years? What does it look like for 2030?" I think that not being afraid to ask those questions and pressuring even if you're at the bottom line or even if you're at the top of the C-suite.
I love that you can ask those questions from anywhere in the company at any level. And you can ask those questions when you're interviewing. I remember I was at an interview and I asked about their diversity policies, and this dude just started listing individual women that work. And I was like, "Sir, that didn't."
I love that because I've even and what's crazy? Even applying for DEI roles, like having them like, okay, well, like I said, the question, like, what does DEI look like over the next 5 years with the company? And I'm like, you're in the DEI department and you have no idea where, okay, maybe so you're right, definitely in the job interview, because again, and they love that, like, I'm one of those people, I'm a highlighter and I'm looking through everything on the website. So when in my interview, when you have the chance to ask questions, that's one of my questions. What are y'all doing about DEI? And what are like, and even some things like, what were the failures that you've seen,
Yeah,
So yeah, I love that.
absolutely. And one of the things we talked about before we actually got on this call to record, you mentioned the emotional toll of being both essential and undervalued. And that just struck me. That is like the definition of what it is to be a Black woman working in America, to be essential and undervalued. And so I'm wondering if we can pause there and just talk through kind of what are some of the quiet ways that that shows up for Black women in the workplace?
Dude, so many ways I can think. Um, my best friend, she works in education, right? And so taking the extra time to explain to the students, this is why this funding, like a lot of the students, she works in the financial aid department on HB